2.5 centimeters in length, which begins behind the sternal end of the clavicle and, passing almost vertically downward, joins with the left innominate vein just below the cartilage of the first rib, close to the right border of the sternum, to form the superior vena cava. It lies in front and to the right of the innominate artery. On its right side are the phrenic nerve and the pleura, which are interposed between it and the apex of the lung. This vein, at its commencement, receives the right vertebral vein, and, lower down, the right internal mammary and right inferior thyroid veins, and sometimes the vein from the first intercostal space. The left innominate vein, about 6 centimeters in length, begins behind the sternal end of the clavicle and runs obliquely downward and to the right behind the upper half of the manubrium sterni to the sternal end of the first right costal cartilage, where it unites with the right innominate vein to form the superior vena cava. It is separated from the manubrium sterni by the sternohyoideus and sternothyroideus, the thymus or its remains, and some loose areolar tissue. Behind it are the 3 large arteries, innominate, left common carotid, and left subclavian, arising from the aortic arch, together with the vagus and phrenic nerves. The left innominate vein may occupy a higher level, crossing the jugular notch and lying directly in front of the trachea. Tributaries. Its tributaries are the left vertebral, left internal mammary, left inferior thyroid, and the left highest intercostal veins, and occasionally some thymic and pericardiac veins. Peculiarities. Sometimes the innominate veins open separately into the right atrium. In such cases, the right vein takes the ordinary course of the superior vena cava. The left vein, left superior vena cava, as it is then termed, which may communicate by a small branch with the right one, passes in front of the root of the left lung, and, turning to the back of the heart, ends in the right atrium. This occasional condition in the adult is due to the persistence of the early fetal condition, and is the normal state of things in birds and some mammalia. The internal mammary veins are venae comitatus to the lower half of the internal mammary artery, and receive tributaries corresponding to the branches of the artery. They then unite to form a single trunk, which runs up on the medial side of the artery and ends in the corresponding innominate vein. The superior phrenic vein, i.e., the vein accompanying the periocardiacal phrenic artery, usually opens into the internal mammary vein. The inferior thyroid veins, 2, frequently 3 or 4 in number, arise in the venous plexus on the thyroid gland, communicating with the middle and superior thyroid veins. They form a plexus in front of the trachea, behind the sternothyroidei. From this plexus, a left vein descends and joins the left innominate trunk, and a right vein passes obliquely downward and to the right across the innominate artery to open into the right innominate vein, just at its junction with the superior vena cava. Sometimes the right and left veins open by a common trunk in the latter situation. These veins receive esophageal, tracheal, and inferior laryngeal veins, and are provided with valves at their terminations in the innominate veins. The highest intercostal vein, right and left, drain the blood from the upper 3 or 4 intercostal spaces. The right vein passes downward and opens into the vena azygos. The left vein runs across the arch of the aorta and the origins of the left subclavian and left common carotid arteries, and opens into the left innominate vein. It usually receives the left bronchial vein and sometimes the left superior phrenic vein, and communicates below with the accessory hemiazygos vein. The superior vena cava drains the blood from the upper half of the body. It measures about 7 centimeters in length and is formed by the junction of the 2 innominate veins. It begins immediately below the cartilage of the right first rib close to the sternum, and, descending vertically behind the first and second intercostal spaces, ends in the upper part of the right atrium opposite the upper border of the third right costal cartilage. The lower half of the vessel is within the pericardium. In its course, it describes a slight curve, the convexity of which is to the right side. Relations. In front are the anterior margins of the right lung and pleura with the pericardium intervening below. These separate it from the first and second intercostal spaces, and from the second and third right costal cartilages. Behind it are the root of the right lung and the right vagus nerve. On its right side are the phrenic nerve and right pleura. On its left side, the commencement of the innominate artery and the ascending aorta, the latter overlapping it. Just before it pierces the pericardium, it receives the azygos vein and several small veins from the pericardium and other contents of the mediastinal cavity. The portion contained within the pericardium is covered, in front and laterally, by the serous layer of the membrane. The superior vena cava has no valves. The azygos vein begins opposite the first or second lumbar vertebrae by a branch, the ascending lumbar vein, sometimes by a branch from the right renal vein or from the inferior vena cava. It enters the thorax through the aortic hiatus in the diaphragm, and passes along the right side of the vertebral column to the fourth thoracic vertebra, where it arches forward over the root of the right lung, and ends in the superior vena cava just before that vessel pierces the pericardium. In the aortic hiatus, it lies with the thoracic duct on the right side of the aorta. In the thorax, it lies upon the intercostal arteries, on the right side of the aorta and thoracic duct, and is partly covered by pleura. Tributaries. It receives the right subcostal and intercostal veins, the upper 3 or 4 of these latter opening by a common stem, the highest superior intercostal vein. It receives the hemiazygos veins, several esophageal, mediastinal, and pericardial veins, and, near its termination, the right bronchial vein. A few imperfect valves are found in the azygos vein, but its tributaries are provided with complete valves. The intercostal veins on the left side, below the upper 3 intercostal spaces, usually form 2 trunks, named the hemiazygos and accessory hemiazygos veins. The hemiazygos vein begins in the left ascending lumbar or renal vein. It enters the thorax through the left crus of the diaphragm and, ascending on the left side of the vertebral column, as high as the 9th thoracic vertebra, passes across the column, behind the aorta, esophagus, and thoracic duct, to end in the azygos vein. It receives the lower 4 or 5 intercostal veins, and the subcostal vein of the left side, and some esophageal and mediastinal veins. The accessory hemiazygos vein descends on the left side of the vertebral column, and varies inversely in size with the highest left intercostal vein. It receives veins from the 3 or 4 intercostal spaces between the highest left intercostal vein and highest tributary of the hemiazygos. The left bronchial vein sometimes opens into it. It either crosses the body of the 8th thoracic vertebrae to join the azygos vein, or ends in the hemiazygos. When this vein is small, or altogether wanting, the left highest intercostal vein may extend as low as the 5th or 6th intercostal space. In obstruction of the superior vena cava, the azygos and hemiazygos veins are one of the principal means by which the venous circulation is carried on, connecting as they do the superior and inferior vena cava, and communicating with the common iliac veins by the ascending lumbar veins and with many of the tributaries of the inferior vena cava. The bronchial veins return the blood from the large bronchi, and from the structures at the roots of the lungs. That of the right side opens into the azygos vein, near its termination. That of the left side, into the highest left intercostal or the accessory hemiazygos vein. A considerable quantity of the blood which is carried to the lungs through the bronchial arteries is returned to the left side of the heart through the pulmonary veins. The veins of the vertebral column. The veins which drain the blood from the vertebral column, the neighboring muscles, and the meninges of the medulla spinalis form intricate plexuses extending along the entire length of the column. These plexuses may be divided into 2 groups, external and internal, according to their positions inside or outside the vertebral canal. The plexuses of the 2 groups anastomose freely with each other, and end in the intervertebral veins.